Hello, I am Christy Vogel, President and founder of Marketing Direction, outsourced marketing experts. And I am so thrilled today because we have put together some of the best and most brilliant marketing minds in the country to kind of sit back and have a casual conversation about marketing pre-COVID, during COVID, post-COVID. Things have really changed. And we saw a lot of those changes back in 2008, 2009. Those of you who were in business back then, we all were. We started when we were, 12 years old. And we saw changes then, and we had to take a look at what was going on with the economy, with business, with our competitors, and then make some shifts based on that. But with COVID, this happened overnight. With 2008, things were kind of slowly on the decline. So things look a lot different with that. We don't have the opportunity to be as proactive as we would like with that. So what I've done is put together some of our lead strategists that work for Marketing Direction together to talk to you today a little bit about what they are seeing. And what's great about this panel is their background comes from everything from consumer packaged goods to healthcare to education and everything in between. And they also have the experience, all of them on the panel today have at least 25 years of experience of not just marketing experience, but holistic business experience with Fortune 500 companies all the way down to startups. And what they have the rare talent to be able to do is to be able to take that Fortune 500 experience and scale it down and make it applicable to smaller growing businesses, which are the types of clients that we typically work with and help every day. So I'm really excited to be able to introduce to you our lead strategists that are sitting on the panel today. And just a second on what our lead strategists actually do for Marketing Direction. So lead strategist is basically a chief marketing officer level marketer, and they are extremely integrated up front with creating the marketing strategy for our clients, and they work hand in hand with our lead marketers, basically the account executives who execute the marketing plan and the day-to-day functions. So they're a very important part of our clients' marketing team. So I'm really excited to introduce, we have Chris Haid, we have Jim Wallace, and we have Tom Vanderclip today. And once again, this is a very casual conversation about all things COVID and marketing and the way things were before COVID and the way things are now and how they're changing, ever changing, as well as in the future, how they're looking like. So I'll open it up to the panel to comment on this. I mean, what are you seeing that the differences are clearly from 2008 when we had to make those pivots to now?
Christy, I guess I'll start out. I think you said something very key, and that's the connecting or identifying the differences between how this impacts big business versus how it impacts small and medium-sized enterprises. And interestingly, I actually think the small and medium-sized enterprises who always have to be closer to the customer and always have to relate to the customer better probably are better suited to understand the impact in their local and regional markets. Even though the big box competitors in retail or the large healthcare systems in the area that I specialize in have to accomplish the same marketing task, they, by their nature, are farther away from the customer than the small and medium-sized enterprises. So I've actually seen, notwithstanding the effect on the local communities, I've actually seen them be able to respond a lot more quickly and be a lot more nimble in their respective businesses.
That's a very good point. Being nimble right now is something that we definitely have to do, and you've got to be proactive when possible, but certainly being nimble and being able to be thoughtfully reactive is what's going to set people apart. Chris, Tom, do you guys have any feedback on that?
Yeah, I think that, just contrasting with 2008, 2009, one of the big differences is that there are just so many unknowns in this situation. 2008 was primarily a financial crisis, and it was global, and it was devastating, but at least there was some precedent for it, and there were financial levers that could be pulled and manipulated, and eventually you knew you were going to kind of come out of it. Whereas this, we're dealing with a virus that is completely uncontrollable, and that there may be a vaccine that will help sort of accelerate a recovery, but that's an unknown. There may be treatment options that allow people to return somewhat to normal, but there are so many unknowns with that as well. And I think that, some of the changes that we're seeing, I think, right now at this stage of sort of the pivot and the adjustments, we're looking ahead to which of these changes are going to be permanent. The going back to normal is really not the question anymore. We'll probably never go back to the old normal. So what is the new normal? What is going to be permanent as far as changes go? And what is going to be, things that return somewhat to normal? I heard a report yesterday that there's not a building in the world that was designed for social distancing. So what does office life look like moving forward? What does that do to commercial real estate moving forward? What does that do to retail moving forward when nothing to date has been designed for this current situation? So a lot of these changes may be permanent.
Good point. Good point. Chris, what say you?
Well, I sort of think about this a little bit differently, and I'd love to hear what, I think some of it relates to what you all are saying, but when you really step back from this, there are psychological and political elements going on currently that are creating a tremendous amount of disruption for we as individuals, both consumers and business leaders. And so, yes, you have the fear and anxiety of a pandemic. You have the discomfort of your life being disruptive. And I think and then of course, all of that surrounded by a very active political, media, social unrest, things like that. So as humans, we like to be kind of at a level. And when you become too high or too low, it becomes very difficult. So if I fast forward that to what does that mean for businesses? So, we as leaders are people, we're humans. It's impossible to eliminate these things, particularly when all of your hierarchical needs are being impacted right now, right? Safety and belonging and all of that stuff. So I think what that means is that it's hard for us as leaders to really listen and assess what is going on. And I think I'm seeing more and more businesses getting more comfort for that. There's a lot of discussion about the new normal never returning, and our normal always evolves, right? It always evolves. It has accelerated trends that were happening, such as digital and takeout and pickup and and shopping and things like that. But people are very resilient. If you look back over time, we've had plagues and viruses and all kinds of things, and somehow the core things that are important to humans are going to be satisfied. People are not going to social distance forever. They're not social distancing right now to the degree. They just, kids in college, and they're still having parties and things of that nature. So I think why I say that is because I start with what is really happening psychologically. And I think the first thing as a leader is to recognize the anxiety that you're having, to recognize that it is impacting how you're making decisions. And I think once you get to that point, you can get a little bit more confidence and comfort to start to assess what's happening in the marketplace. The other thing that I find varies depending on which clients I talk to is depending on where you are in this country, there's very different sense of the psychological factors as well as activity. I think I recently saw that mobility measurements for the U.S. were back to March levels, pre-lockdowns and things like that. So people are moving around, and so we are sort of hearing everything is locked down and nothing's happening. But then here in Florida, if you go out, the traffic is there, the lines are there, and things of that nature. So I guess that's all a lens that I use to try to help assess, okay, what does this all mean? And I think you've got to take that into account before you can get down to the nitty-gritty of what it means for your customers, what it means for your business strategy, and things like that. So curious what you guys think about that.
Well, and you bring up a good point as far as geographically having to take a look, especially if you are marketing to prospects and clients and all over the country or all over the world. You can't make that assumption that they're all responding in the same way or their priorities are the same. But just before we started this, I was just talking about I was in Idaho and just outside of Boise, and things looked a lot different in Idaho than they did in downtown St. Petersburg. So as a marketer, you have to understand that and really put that hat on of that person living in Idaho versus that person living in St. Petersburg versus that person living in California in order to be able to resonate with that. So that brings up an excellent point. Jim, you were going to say something.
Yes, I agree, Chris. I think I've seen three general trends, and my focus is generally highly regulated businesses, so healthcare. My experience has been in aerospace, financial services, and I think there's three general trends. The first is just media saturation. There's this huge sensationalist trend that's been amplified by media fighting for viewer space, and the only direction they can seem to go is more sensational stories contributing to this tribalism, I think. The second, as an offshoot of that, and we've seen cycles of this before in business, is the impending fatigue that comes from that, and closely thereafter is distrust and skepticism, which is usually followed by a rebound of re-engagement. I think, Chris, you just described it. I think we're in the mid stage of skepticism, moving into rebound. In my particular industries, it's pretty simple that it's redefined the baseline. There's a joke inside the healthcare industry. How do you identify a bad hospital? Well, they advertise their emergency room wait time on a billboard. You're waiting for an emergency room? Why would you ever advertise a negative? And so I think people, particularly within the pandemic, as the pandemic's defined it, are really looking inside their own sphere of activity and figuring out what's important, where are my risks, and kind of redefining how they're going to engage. And that's been amplified by, I think, the protests that have come from being cooped up after several months. And it's really put a premium on businesses that can say, we always sanitized our area. We're a restaurant. The new normal never left. Or in healthcare, we're your doctor and we've always been here. Please call us if you have an issue. In medical devices, things that help move care closer to the home are going to be more highly priced than things that move you into a facility full of sick people. And so just across the entire spectrum, I think we're seeing this fatigue move to skepticism and then re-engagement, Chris, as you said. Tom, I'd be interested in your perspective.
Well, something that Chris said about this is accelerating some trends that were already happening. I think that's very poignant. Part of my background is in higher education, and that's an industry that or a discipline that is having to adapt very rapidly to trends that were already out there. The brick and mortar colleges and universities were already competing against the online universities. And when you take, an education from an Ivy League school, for instance, and put it completely online, does it still have the same value as the brick and mortar experience? And Jim, I think you're absolutely right that it's causing those institutions and those like institutions to take a real hard look at their sort of what their DNA and their overall value proposition is, and to sort of take a few steps back and offer that as their differentiation, as opposed to just relying on it, because the cost of higher education was already being questioned. So now you throw somewhat parity into the mix of an online education from any accredited university versus an Ivy League versus a Big 10, Big 12, SEC, whatever. That's really accelerated that trend, and it's forced those institutions to really take a very discerning look at themselves.
So we've heard about the industries of healthcare and higher education. Chris, what other industries are you kind of peeking into and seeing how they're having to make changes?
Well, I do a lot of work in the food and wellness, consumer packaged goods, consumer services space. And what's interesting is that I was busiest March and April during the shutdown. These food companies in particular, a lot of packaged goods companies are having blockbuster years. They have had some business, some channel challenges, less being sold in a restaurant, more maybe in grocery. So what I found was initially they were just scrambling to get product out the door, and there were many in that case. And they continued to move business ahead. Around late May, there was a pause that I sort of sensed across a lot of these industries. And I don't know if it just took a little while for leadership to kind of get their strategy together, but there was a pause for a good part of the summer where projects were put on hold, and I think there was a lot of where are we going to go next and that type of thing. Folks are emerging. Many are deep in 2021 planning, recognize that the world isn't going to stop and explode, and we can move forward. And so what I see now is just back to the real fundamentals. And this is what I tell all my clients and folks that I interact with, is that it's the fundamentals of what your brand is. Who are you? To who? And why? How are you different? As a company themselves, yes, you have to deal with some administrative, important but noisy elements of people being in different places, and how do you change your processes and things like that. But it's back to the fundamentals. You are, and I think for me, my background as chief brand officer, chief marketing officer, head of innovation, I have had a career of coming into companies that were looking to make a transformational change, take success to the next level, turn around unsuccessful businesses, et cetera. And so I really thrive in the come in, determine what it's about, and craft your path forward. I have had to coach a lot of leaders who are very smart and have had more of a career and success of being good run the trains, and you keep the business going. And so I'm finding that some leaders have not found themselves in such tumultuous times. And so I do spend some time just in some general coaching and perspective, and quite honestly, confidence gaining. And I think that's the role of folks like us and you know, the team you've put together, Christy, at Marketing Directions of us, the lead strategists, is that in these times, we need to be a calm in the storm. Organizations are running around trying to figure out where to put people, change businesses, change processes. What do we do? What do we do? You know, our role is to be a calm in the storm, provide some perspective, anchor people back to what is really important. What is your business model? What is your brand proposition? And tie that back to help them interpret what is happening and what does it mean specifically for them. I have also spent a fair amount of time helping people to avoid jumping on the bandwagon. You see this a lot of times. Everyone's nodding, right? It's like, you know, about a week or two after the pandemic and the lockdowns, every advertisement on TV is, we're here for you. We're here for you. Well, you know, after week one, I think we get kind of tired of it. And so in any time, as a brand, you have to be true to who you are, but don't just follow the bandwagon, because you're not going to be heard. You're really not going to be heard. And at some point, when it becomes too prevalent, it just becomes noise and it becomes disingenuous. So those are some of the areas where I've been focused.
Yeah, excellent point. One of my favorite examples of having to pivot and pivot again and pivot again. And by the way, if I never hear the word pivot again, I'll be happy. But I have a feeling we're going to keep hearing it. But one of our clients is a product fulfillment company that primarily works with clients that are selling business to consumer. So if they have a product that they need to send to retail stores, such as Bed Bath & Beyond, this company would inventory their product. They would, what they call pack and kit, these products in a way, they would package them in a way that Bed Bath & Beyond wants to receive them. So a business to business purchase, transaction, whatever you want to call it. So guess what? Bed Bath & Beyond and other retailers like them close for a period of time. So this facility that was, for the most part, packing and shipping things to retail outlets that are now no longer open, overnight went from crazy busy to virtually nothing. So what do they do? Well, they started, just like most businesses, we got to lay off people. We've got an empty warehouse with no activity going on. But then talk about having to assess what's going on, but try to predict what's going to happen. Is literally overnight, these individuals, these consumers that were buying these products at your Bed Bath & Beyonds, they were savvy. They started looking it up on the internet. They wanted their products. So they started going directly to the manufacturer and finding these things. So this product fulfillment facility that had laid off all of these people in the warehouse, now suddenly they were even busier than they were before, because now they're shipping to the individual. So they're shipping ones and twosies to the individual as opposed to hundreds to different retail outlets. So not only did they have to bring back in all of these workers, but they're saying, bring your friends too, because we need extra help. So then the retail shops opened back up again, not at full capacity, but they opened back up again. So now they're still selling directly to the consumers, and they're still selling or shipping to the retail outlets. So you've got a B2B company, business-to-business company, that had to reinvent themselves to become a B2C shipping company, and had to shift once again to be a B2B and B2C all at once. So talk about shifting, pivoting, trying to predict. These are things that we didn't have to deal with in 2008, 2009. This is totally different. So to say that this has all been exciting is an understatement. But I tell you what, you've got to be on top of these things as much as you can be. And like I said, we try to be proactive, but if you don't know how to be instrumental, as you're being reactive. And if you can't be nimble, then you're going to lose out on a lot of opportunities. So I love this. We've kind of gotten a perspective of all these different industries.
Christy, just to build on that, because I'm very familiar with product fulfillment solutions, having been the lead strategist on that with that client. Love those guys. The fact that the example you brought up goes back to the point that I started with about an acceleration of trends. Product fulfillment had a very small piece of their business was direct to consumer. And that was the area that we identified as the biggest opportunity for them to differentiate in the marketplace, and who their ideal consumer target was and things of that nature. And so they were on a path to start that for new business development. And so in this case, the pandemic actually helped to accelerate what was already a foundational opportunity for them, which was great to see. So it's interesting, how, yes, you have to pivot. In this case, they were able to pivot in a way that really made sense for their fundamental business model and what they offered in the marketplace, which was great to see.
And they were able to do it much more quickly because there was already that strategy pre-COVID that was in place. So yes, pivoting, but not having to figure it out on the fly, which is something that, we really want to be doing unless we absolutely have to be doing that for sure. So
I would say one other important reason for them why they were able to do that is, as leaders, they are very open-minded and willing to change and do what it needs to take. They have processes in place that allow them to be flexible. Think about it, processes that allow flexibility. And so I think they are wired fundamentally as the kind of leader that can weather storms, and have built a culture and an organization that prides themselves on whether the storm is a delivery was, there was a problem with a small delivery in one particular day, all the way up to something major like this. So I think it goes back to the culture and mindset of your organization is particularly important at this time, to be able to make lemonade out of lemons.
absolutely. And to squeeze those lemons quickly, because if you wait too long, it's definitely going to pass you by. So thoughtfully, but quickly for sure. So with everything that we're seeing, I just saw an article in the Harvard Business Review, so this isn't just me saying this, but there's a lot of downside, there's a lot of shifting and reinventing ourselves, and unfortunately, we're going to see a lot of industries, that are hit harder than others. We're going to see some industries not come back for a long time. We're going to see other industries that are thriving, and we have a medical supply client that is just, crazy busy. So you've got a lot of different things, but no matter what industry or no matter where you're coming from, there've got to be opportunities that are coming out of this. And I think the big difference between those who are, it's not a question of are there opportunities, it's those business leaders who are identifying what those opportunities are and taking the risk right now when it makes the most sense. It might be a little scarier time to do it, but it makes the most sense if you really want to stand out and taking full advantage of those opportunities. So the Harvard Business Review was saying that now's the better time than ever to be investing in marketing, especially if you're looking around. Again, it depends on the industry, but if you're looking around at your competitors and they're still hunkered down, they're still not sure if they're coming out of this. Well, you as a business leader, okay, we're definitely coming out of this. This is we don't know how long it's gonna last, but we're here for the long term. So let's make the biggest impact we absolutely can right now. And instead of turning down our messaging and being quiet until things look better and things look a little more secure and obvious as to what the future holds, that's, that's when more of the noise is going to be out there. It's very noisy now, as we talked about. But Chris, early on, one of the first things that you said to me when all of this started shutting down and we were like, okay, what is going on, is in addition to what you were saying about being true to your brand, you really needed to sit down and understand, first of all, what were your prospects' priorities prior to COVID? And hopefully you already knew that. If you didn't, then you need to talk to somebody about that. And then how have they shifted during COVID, and how do they continue to shift? And if your messaging to your prospects is the same pre-COVID as it is during COVID, you are absolutely not resonating with them, which means you're not getting their attention, which means they are not going to take the action that you wanted them to take. And with a lot of our clients, I would say probably all of our clients, they were in sales cycles pre-COVID that stalled. So how do you shift that mindset, and how do you shift what you're saying to your prospects so that your product or your service still remains a priority? And Chris, you've identified that maybe day one of this, and it does go back to marketing 101. You have to understand the priority of your client, but don't assume that what it was 6 months ago is what it is today, for sure. So what other opportunities are you all seeing out there that have been identified, that you have seen working with your clients, or that you see as future opportunities that business leaders should be taking advantage of now?
Christy, I couldn't agree more with you. I think, and to put it in like a specific, explicit terms, the 4 P's, price, promotion, product, and place. Clearly, place has changed. The channel through which we market our products has been upended, and a lot of industries are going to have to look at D2C, direct to consumer models differently than maybe they did before. But there are really important learning points behind each of those 3 P's. Pricing is no longer just a matter of how much it costs you to make your product or service. It's what does it cost the consumer? In medical imaging technology, one of our clients, as you know, Christy, manufactures a mature and sells a mature X-ray imaging device, which has largely been superseded just because of admiration of technology by CT scans and MRI machines, both of which are much more expensive and less safe for the consumer. And so that particular client now has an opportunity to reposition their product, which is very mature, in a market where it's both as efficacious but also safer and less expensive, both for the purchaser, who would be the radiology technician, but also for the consumer, who's the patient. And that really goes across all industries. A former employer of mine, SpaceX, is seeing the same thing in space launches. Disney's seeing this in attraction entertainment, having to redefine what's the cost to the consumer and what are they really buying. I think it goes back to Chris's point, which is fads come and go, governments come and go. Your brand and your value proposition might change over time, and you should always look at it, but don't do something just because it happens to be grabbing the headline. There might be transient opportunities to take advantage of that, but all of the dissension currently out there and fear will migrate to something more stable. And so you're better off just reinforcing, I think is how Chris would put it, reinforcing your culture and your brand as opposed to being distracted. And so I would turn over each of those 4 P's and try to understand, how is my product maybe perceived differently in the marketplace? What's the price to the consumer? Clearly the place has changed. And that leaves promotion, which is our business. How can you bring all three of those factors to bear in consistent, reliable messaging that strikes a chord with your customers?
Yeah, I agree. That's a great point. And I think it's the opportunity right now, especially in the cycle that we're in with the pandemic, is to look at sort of what are the short-term reactionary messaging points that we all kind of had to put out there. But more importantly, what are the long-term benefits that are related to those changes moving forward? I'll give you an example. I work with a radiation oncology client that has freestanding locations that are, as opposed to a hospital-based or a large facility-based treatment center. And when COVID first hit, the messaging shifted to, our freestanding locations are easier to control. You don't have to go into the hospital environment and be exposed and all that kind of thing. But the long-term benefit and the messaging that we can carry forward that really gets to the DNA of this client and their product offering is more of a convenience message for the consumer long-term, or for the patient long-term, is that, when you are looking at radiation treatment for cancer, for instance, you're talking about an average of 44 to 50, 60 visits for that treatment period. So going to a freestanding location with its own parking lot that's 40 steps from the door, as opposed to navigating a parking deck in a large hospital facility 44 to 60 times over the course of treatment, is a long-term benefit that came out of this, and I won't use the P word, Christy, but the adaptation of the COVID messaging. But the longer term benefit, and like Chris was saying, sort of dig down beneath the reaction and look for what is your customer saying, or what is your patient saying, or what are their needs, how have they shifted, and how are you going to be able to meet them and persist in the future to meet them. And so that's one example of messaging moving forward that has caused the acute cause was the pandemic, but the long-term benefit is really a stronger positioning for the client.
Yeah, Tom, couple things you said there that really resonate with me. One is, I think of a brand as having a collection of benefits, core benefits, and to build a very powerful brand, you have to think of it as like music, where you don't just bang the same note. You have a variety of things that you will flex from, but you're not going to just kind of go off, totally off where you are. And so I think that that's something that's really important. The other thing is, you talked about low-hanging fruit versus longer-term opportunity, and it made me think of a client that Christy knows quite well, who had a successful business in selling refurbished technology, phones, computers, things of that nature. And we helped them identify their growth strategy was to, that was an important part of their business, but to expand into new equipment and bigger networking solutions as well as services. And when the pandemic hit, their low-hanging fruit opportunity was in their old business, because you had all these people now working at home, and companies were scrambling to get, extra PCs and phones and things of that nature. I think the key, though, is how easy would it be for a company like that to fall back on what they knew and was comfortable with, and lose sight of how do you take that with those new customers that they had to re-engage, probably now that things are starting to evolve with, hey, we were there for you, the kinds of things we did, that a tangible example of how we can be with you in the future. So I think that some of these low-hanging fruit, if activated on appropriately can help you get back to that bigger long-term opportunity and strategy.
Excellent point. You're absolutely right, Chris. So I want all of you to pull out your crystal balls and let's take a look at the future. What the heck does the future hold? And you know, what I can predict is it's going to continue to be a crazy ride. But what do you all see for the near future? I mean, we are so close to the end of 2020. Thank goodness. Hopefully, we'll be able to look behind us on that shortly. But what do you see for Q4, as well as what do you see for 2021? And not just with marketing, but in general, you know, with travel, with business travel, with these conferences. We're trying to do virtual trade shows now. What does that look like? What will the success of that be? Even when things tend to open up a little bit more, are people going to feel comfortable going to these trade shows and being crammed into a convention center like they used to be? Are they going to feel comfortable flying? Are companies going to allow their people to be flying? So tell me a little bit about what you're seeing in your crystal ball. And I'm going to document all of this. And 6 months from now, we're going to replay this and see who was right and who was wrong.
Who wants to go first?
I'll throw one out, and maybe we just kind of go around and throw out some different ones, no particular order. I've done a lot of work in brand trust and brand equity, and I would say that it's no surprise, but consumers, people's level of distrust and skepticism are at an all-time high, okay? They don't trust the government, the media, the local politicians, the scientists, because of multiple reasons I'm not going to dive too deep into. But what that means is that people are relying more on themselves and their judgment and their very small circle of friends or family to make decisions. And so I think it puts a tremendous amount of less obvious headwind for brands. And I'm going to pick out particularly smaller brands who maybe are a little earlier in the journey of what it really means to develop a brand and its values and its messaging. And I think one key takeaway from this is, yes, brands have to be genuine and authentic, but it's never been more important than it is now. You cannot fake it. You can't shuck and jive. People are seeing through it, and they will not take kindly to it because of the halo of just general distrust. I think people are inherently optimistic. I don't want to make it sound like doom and gloom, but the lens that through which they're going to interpret information and messaging will be much more difficult going forward. It is now, and I think that will continue for some time.
I'll go ahead and invoke Johnny Carson's Karnak the Magnificent. The answer is individuality. What I mean by that, I think, is to capitalize, I think, both on Tom and Chris's points, Christy, is that this wave of dissension, sensationalism leading to fatigue and distrust is just going to cause people to be much more introspective and much less likely to buy mass promotion that seems to be opportunistic. And so I think as you look at industry to industry, those brands and companies and industries that can reinforce their ties to the consumer by demonstrating knowledge of the customer personas, by demonstrating proximity to the customer, either through direct to consumer means or direct sales means through home delivery, things like that, they're going to excel. The ones that are going to struggle are going to be, in my opinion, the large hospital systems, the big box retailers, the large restaurant chains who have really plumbed the endpoints of economies of scale. The economies of scale are the biggest casualty, I think, in this next wave coming out of the pandemic. And so anybody that can reinforce their connection to the consumer is just going to have, through individuality, celebrating individuality, is going to have a marked advantage going forward. What does that mean precisely? I think it varies a lot by industry, but Chris, again, I think made the stellar point. You can't fake genuineness. Don't even try, because in an era of fatigue and skepticism, that's the first thing people are going to pick up on. So be true to your brand and hone your interaction with your target customer.
Yeah, I would just add on to that. Those are both great points, Jim and Chris. That Christy, when you asked about the fourth quarter, I think you have to be very cautious, to Chris's earlier point, not to be reactive. It's going to be a snake pit, through the political season that is going to dominate the fourth quarter, I think. And so the play there is to avoid being pulled into that and to not create short-term solutions for longer-term issues. I think that, Jim, to your point, tailored messaging and really meeting the customer where they are, that plays along with transparency and really understanding your customer and what their particular needs are at this time, at this stage of the buying cycle, at this, demographic, at this, geographic location. And so really just being precise and tailoring messaging based on personas and as much consumer data and demographic, psychographic info as you can behind your messaging platforms. And then the other thing that you both mentioned, transparency, I think that goes not just between companies and their customers, but I think that speaks to culture itself. That is, as far as retaining employees and getting the most out of employees that are going to, that's going to translate to a better customer experience. Because as we've all moved to a more remote environment and we've gotten used to being separated physically from an office environment, and where company cultures in the past could be very office and location centric, it's really more the attributes of that company, what their mission, their morals, their values really are, and what the company stands for, and what that means to employees internally, that's going to translate to customers externally. Because I think not just the external company brand, but the internal company brand and the culture itself is going to be vitally important moving forward and need to be defined if it wasn't before.
Excellent point. Excellent point. If you're not communicating with your team on a regular basis as a business leader, then your team's going to make things up, and it's not going to be on the positive side. So being honest and clear, because just like Chris said, if you're not being genuine and to your target, same thing with your team, they're going to sniff it out even faster if you're either not speaking to them or communicating with them and not being upfront with them. Obviously, you don't share 100%, but sharing what you can and being authentic with them will help them feel more a part of what's going on, even if 100% of that information is not positive. And let's face it, these days it's not going to. I've heard conversations with business leaders that they had to give out information about a 10% pay cut across the board. And everyone was relieved because they thought everyone was going to be laid off. So, you know, it wasn't a welcome to have a 10% pay cut, but the conversations that are being had now, you'd be really surprised at what your team can handle based on, you know, the information that you're giving them. But just communicate with them effectively, thoughtfully, but keep the communication flow going. And as a business leader, keep your doors open as well. We're, as business leaders, we're scrambling. We're just trying to figure out day to day, hour by hour, how to keep it going, how to keep the lights on sometimes. But if you're not communicating and if you're not adding additional hours every day to be able to communicate authentically with your team, then you're going to start experiencing some breakdown there in addition to everything else that you're seeing. So just make sure that you're taking care of them as well. Guys, last thoughts as we wrap up.
Christy, I just wanted to add, I think an important part of that communication is to ensure that you are prioritizing and being very clear about those priorities, because if you are not, someone else will prioritize, and it's probably not the person or the things that you want prioritized. So something that's always stuck with me.
Excellent point. Excellent point. And you're absolutely right with us. So, well, guys, I think this was quite valuable. And those of you that have taken the time to share a little bit of time with us today out of your busy schedule, we get that there are thousands of webinars out there. And every time I get an invitation for yet another webinar, I kind of just roll my eyes. But I got value out of it. I hope all of you watching got value out of it as well, that you can take and apply to your business today. If any of you have watched this and said, gee, what would this look like to have some of this marketing muscle specifically for my business, please don't hesitate to reach out. Our website is marketingdirection.com, or just shoot me an email. I'm at cvogel@marketingdirection.com. That's C as in cat, V as in Victor, OTEL @marketingdirection.com. And I want to thank Chris and Tom and Jim for giving up some of your time today to share some of your thought-provoking wisdom. And once again, this is a stellar panel, and I just think that the information that is being exchanged here is, it's rare when you can get this kind of brain power all together at once to think thoughtfully on for the common good of business leaders out there everywhere. So thank you all for your time today. And I have a feeling we're going to be doing more of these as we get feedback from everyone. So if you thought that this was worth watching, please share it with others that you think may benefit from it. And we wish you guys safety and happiness, and drive forward with everything that you do in your business. We wish you a lot of luck and success for sure. Thank you all.
Thank you.